This is the continued story of the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin, as retold to the children of the Watertown SDA Church Primary Sabbath School. I'm your storyteller, Austin Bacchus. Let's go. Chapter 19. Pull your socks up, Elwyn. With the annual camp meeting at Wabag coming up, I sent a radio message to Captain W.E. Paslow, Bill Paslow. He was a most capable pilot and a wonderfully obliging friend. My hope was to charter his Dragon airplane to take Pastors Campbell, Grieve, Gander, and me to Wabag. Word came by radio that the Dragon would be at Togoba at 9:30 in the morning. Captain Paslow checked the weights of the personnel and cargo. As we waited, he commented that the wind was a little against us. For the only time I could remember, the wind was blowing opposite the way it usually blew at that airstrip. The Togoba airstrip has plenty of length, but has a slight rise at one end of the airway. This particular morning, we would have to do an uphill takeoff to take off into the wind. We taxied the full length of the runway. The pilot did the usual pre-takeoff checkup, which requires bringing the motors up to about 1,000 revolutions per minute. At that moment, I noticed the wind had changed. Now, I'm a pilot also, so immediately I started to undo my seatbelt in order to walk up to the pilot and inform him that the wind had changed in case he hadn't noticed it. One of my friends, noticing what I was planning to do, said, "Oh, sit down, Martin. Bill knows more about flying than you are ever likely to know." That was true, and by this time we were beginning our takeoff roll. By the time we reached the end of the airstrip, we were airborne, but almost as soon as we went over the end of the strip, we ran into a downward draft. All on board the aircraft, as well as all the European staff at the Togoba Hansenide colony nearby from where we had taken off, realized the odds were against us. What actually happened, I believe, was that we ended up doing a downwind uphill takeoff. So it's true that we were airborne, but we didn't have sufficient airspeed to cope with the downward pushing wind. And within minutes, we were flying down into a gorge at a lower altitude than the airstrip we had taken off from. I poured out my heart to God for help. Nurse June Bartlett later told me that almost as soon as the plane was heard taking off, she felt we were in danger, and she petitioned our Heavenly Father on our behalf. Beryl Doble, who was ironing at that moment, was overwhelmingly urged by a voice that seemed to say, "Pray, pray, pray." She dropped to her knees immediately and pleaded for our protection as well. The text that seemed to occupy all our minds was, "Call upon me in the day of trouble." And surely this was a day of trouble for us. All who know the highlands around Togoba and Mount Hagen know how rugged the country is. Within a matter of moments after takeoff, the trees appeared to be streaming by the plane's windows, and then the wingtips could be seen clipping off small twigs and branches from the trees. With motors screaming, Bill fought desperately to regain altitude. We were flying in a gorge with towering mountains on each side, our wingtips being lifted by the skillful pilot so as to avoid hitting limbs of trees and grassy ridges. With perspiration dripping from his face, even though it was a cold highland morning, the captain called back to us, "Hold hard, gentlemen, we're not gonna make it." Directly ahead loomed the towering mountainside into which it seemed certain that we must crash, but just then our pilot cut both engines and deliberately banked the plane steeply into a big tree. His words, "Hold hard, gentlemen," were the last words that Bill ever spoke. He gave his life for us, for he must have known that he had no chance of survival in the nose of the airplane. All I can remember of the actual crash is the wing and fuselage fabric being torn away. Then apparently we were all knocked unconscious temporarily, except for the pilot, who was killed instantly. Pastor Grieve was the first to regain consciousness. Gallantly, and in spite of his injuries, he pulled Pastor Gander and me out of the wreckage. He admitted that he was spurred on by seeing fuel that was pouring out of the hot engine, but the wreckage never caught fire. Pastor Grieve immediately set out for help. Dr. Yates and his wife, Nurse Florence Burdett, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Doble, Mr. Cornell, the national staff, and some patients from the Hansenide colony hurriedly set out for the gorge in which they believed the Dragon had crashed. They had heard the motors cut out and the loud yelling of natives watching from the mountainsides. Within a short time, they were at the scene of the crash. Dr. Yates found the pilot's face had been crushed beyond recognition. Pastors Grieve and Gander were battered, and I was much more seriously injured. Preparations were hurriedly made to carry us out. Europeans and nationals did a wonderful job making improvised stretchers, carrying us out of the rugged gorge. When I later saw the site of the plane crash and the gorge out of which they carried us, I felt ashamed, because apparently in my half-conscious state, I had rebuked them several times as they tried to carry me up the steep mountainside. The doctor, sisters, and carriers told me later that I kept saying, "Easy, easy, boys," and apparently I would complain every time that they got my feet higher than my head. I can't remember anything about the conversation or the carrying out. The Mount Hagen government doctors were rushed to Togoba. Nurse Bartlett said to one of the government doctors, "Doctor, see what you can do for poor old Elwyn." After feeling my pulse, he said, "Poor old Elwyn, as you call him, is in the hands of the Almighty." I heard him say that, but apparently he couldn't feel my pulse. and my head was covered with part of a blood-soaked blanket. Then Miss Burdett called the doctor over and said, "Please, doctor, see whether anything can be done for Elwyn." He too apparently failed to pick up my pulse, for I heard him say, "I'm afraid it's too late." By this time, I was ready to call it quits myself. The doctors in consultation decided to fly Pastors Gander and Grieve to the Madang District Hospital where their fractures could be attended to, but they all thought it was too late for me because my condition was too critical for such a trip. I can clearly recall lying there as Dr. Yates came over to me. Apparently, a few minutes after the decision was made to fly the other two men out, he pulled the blood-soaked blanket back off my face and said, "Well, Elwyn, old man, how are you?" "Doctor, I've had it." Dr. Yates, with a stethoscope on me, said, "Oh, pull your socks up, Elwyn, you're all right." I certainly didn't know what to believe. One doctor had said I was in the hands of the Almighty, another said that it was too late, and now here was Dr. Yates telling me to pull my socks up. I was all right. Long days and weary nights were made easier by loving hands. Everything possible was done to ease my pain and bring relief and comfort. My wife, who had been hurried to my bedside in the home of Dr. and Mrs. Yates, was with me continually. They had not flown me out because the plane took off before Dr. Yates realized that I was still alive. She says that during those critical days, I only had to move at night, and Dr. Yates would be out of bed and by my side, feeling my pulse, running the stethoscope over my chest. One morning, I awakened, and the pain was gone. When the doctor came in and asked how I was feeling, I replied, "Well, I'm feeling like I could do a round or two." He gave me a once-over and then hugged me and said, "Oh, you're coming through, you're coming through." Indignantly, I asked what he meant by coming through. "Oh, Elwyn, for several days your life has been swinging in the balance. I never thought you had a chance." I immediately launched a counterattack by saying, "Roy, I ought to get out of bed and pop you one on the nose. When I was ready and wanted to die, you said, 'Pull your socks up, you're all right.'" With tears running down his face, he said, "Elwyn, I never thought you had a chance. But I knew that if you for just a moment gave up hope, that was it. This is not my work that has brought you through, but the work of the great physician." After 2 days more, Dr. Yates decided that I had improved sufficiently to travel by road to Mount Hagen Hospital for x-rays. The x-rays revealed multiple skull fractures. The 3 doctors who examined the plates were amazed that one could live with such extensive fractures, and those who saw the twisted wreckage of the plane were even more amazed. No doubt because of the prayers of our wonderful Christian family, our lives are spared. There is not the slightest doubt in my mind that I am now living on borrowed time. Be sure to tune in next time for more stories from the book I Saw God's Hand by E.L. Martin. And meanwhile, feel free to check out these videos as well as others on my YouTube channel with many more mission and Bible stories for kids and adults. God bless you.